Hey, how are we doing, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today the name of the game is the running back position for Week 10 fantasy football action. In this video, you will find my 5 must-start running backs for this week. In another episode, I've also posted, in addition to this video today, I've also got my must-sit running backs for Week 10 action, in addition to another trade advice video. So go check those videos out after you finish watching this one. But again, today we're talking 5 must-start running backs for Week 10 action. We've got 4 teams on bye here in Week 10, the Bears, the Bengals, the Giants, and the Texans. So we're a little bit limited in the options that we have for our lineups here in Week 10, and we've got some nice matchups that we've circled, we've picked out, and found some situations that I think can be very productive for us in our lineups here this week. So with that being said, drop down, give today's episode a like before we get started, and click that subscribe button if you're new around here. With that being said, let's hit the intro and get straight in to our first must-start running back for this week. All right, here we go. For the first player we've got on the list for today, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Carolina Panthers. This is a matchup I think is relatively difficult, and we outlined that last week when we had Damien Harris as a must-sit player. For the most part, that situation played out well in our favor in terms of Damien Harris's overall production. He got a lucky touchdown. Ramondre Stevenson drove all the way down the field, and then they ended up subbing him out, putting in Damien Harris. He punches in a 3-yard touchdown. If that's not the case, that's a pretty quiet outing for him. Despite the difficulties in matchup here, what I like for James Conner has a lot more to do with usage and opportunity for volume in this offense here in Week 10. Chase Edmonds is out of the lineup right now. Sustained a high ankle sprain very, very early. Only had, one rush for 3 yards against the San Francisco 49ers last week. James Conner took over. He became the 3-down back, and boy, did he dominate. He absolutely crushed it. If you happened to start James Conner last week, we had both him and Chase Edmonds. Unfortunately, if you started Chase Edmonds, that injury was killer to a lot of lineups. But if you also went out and started James Conner, he was a week winner. 36.5 points, I believe it was, in half PPR scoring. 3 total touchdowns, over 170 scrimmage yards. He looked dominant out there, running the football, receiving it. He was doing it all, getting explosive runs, being the goal line hammer. We haven't seen James Conner put up these type of numbers since the first season in Pittsburgh when he was in relief of Le'Veon Bell during that holdout year. James Conner is not one of the elite talented running backs in today's NFL, but he's certainly a player who has a quality 3-down skill set and can get the job done. And even without Kyler Murray, they still found ways to keep this offense moving down the field. Colt McCoy is a very good and underrated backup in this league, and he's had very productive stints throughout his career with various teams, whether it was the Washington football team. I want to say that he filled in for the Giants for a time. He's not as bad as a quarterback as you would think. Kyler could potentially be back in the lineup here this week against Carolina, give this team an additional level of dynamic playmaking ability. But what I love here is that we all knew that James Conner was going to be the goal line presence this year. Chase Edmonds has had virtually no touches in that area of the field. James Conner will now also be handling the receiving work, and he will be the running back on the field outside of Eno Benjamin for basically the vast majority of the snaps. And that's what matters here. There's going to be a lot of volume opportunities, a lot of work on the table for James Conner here in Week 10. I like the situation. Not the easiest matchup in the world, but certainly something that he can exploit. And in terms of being a top 24 running back play, I absolutely think that that's something that's in the cards here for Conner in Week 10. Darrell Henderson taking on the San Francisco 49ers. We're putting him on the list today because Darrell Henderson seems to be someone that fantasy managers tend to be quick to panic on. And in the down performances he's had this season, he has bounced back very, very strong the week after his down games. And this is an offense I trust way too much to overreact to what happened on Sunday Night Football, myself included, and the vast majority of NFL fans out there expected the Rams to come out and completely stomp the Titans. That could not have been farther from the case. Matt Stafford played a terrible game, back-to-back plays. I think it was a span of 26 seconds through brutal interceptions. And it really killed this football team, and they were playing catch-up, which led to Darrell Henderson having a terrible game script for basically the entirety of this football game. Again, this team is too talented. Their offense is too productive. They move the football too well in games when Matt Stafford is actually playing well for these struggles to continue. In Week 7 against the Lions, Darrell Henderson only had 6.5 points of output. He turns around the next start, 21.5 at Houston. So against a San Francisco 49ers team that got absolutely bludgeoned this past week against James Conner, who was the first player on the list in today's episode. I think Henderson bounces back. That defense looked atrocious against the run. It looked like their linebackers were just jogging after James Conner, who was not a very explosive running back in the open field, and he was getting out there making bursting plays and having explosive runs and receptions as well. So Darrell Henderson, I'm not worried about him at all. He's a top 12 weekly start at this point in the season with the injuries we have, and with the steady consistency he's shown to this point in the year. Keep Darrell Henderson in those fantasy lineups. Cordarrelle Patterson, say what you will. I've been very, very firm on my stance with Cordarrelle throughout the entirety of his productivity here in this Falcons offense. He's not going away. I don't care that he is not a consistent rushing or receiving threat. He's just an offensive weapon. He gets the job done every single week. He finds a way. He had 10 rushing yards this past week against the Saints. People were saying sit Cordarrelle Patterson. I figured that there was a situation, an opportunity that would play out where he would be productive enough in the receiving game because, again, I projected when Ridley went out that they were going to need him to give them more in the receiving phase of the game. He did just that, made some huge receptions, played very, very well in the receiving game. He comes out here and notches what was his 7th straight week of a 13-point or more half PPR scoring fantasy outing. That is incredible consistency when we're talking about a running back position group, which Cordarrelle Patterson is not your traditional fantasy running back. He is not a player who goes out there and runs the ball 25 times and picks up 100 yards and a touchdown. This is 10 or so rushing attempts. Maybe he'll see 6, 7, 8 targets in the receiving game. Finds the end zone, gets very valuable looks and opportunities down inside the 20-yard line, and he just finds a way to make it happen again week in, week out. Against Dallas this week, if he lines up out wide, we've seen you can expose them deep down the field. Trayvon Diggs, we saw the Broncos here in week 9 that we just had, took advantage of his aggressiveness, used it against him, and scored some plays against Trayvon Diggs because they made him bite on some of those routes that he's been jumping earlier on in the season. Patterson, whether it's getting it done on the ground or through the air, at this point for me, he doesn't have that elite name recognition, that elite name value, but certainly someone who I think is a top 24 running back player at bare minimum, week in and week out. He's got the caliber to be a high upside running back too, and obviously he's one of the most versatile players as well because you can play him at the wide receiver or running back position depending on which fantasy platform you play on. Certainly you can use him in your flex, whatever the case might be. Patterson is one of the most valuable players because of all of the multitude of places you can put him in your lineup and because of the dynamic ability he presents as a rushing threat and as a receiving threat, who also scores touchdowns for us. So Cordarrelle Patterson, I could not be more impressed with the steps forward he's taken this week. It's been fantastic to watch this year. Josh Jacobs taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a matchup I absolutely love here. Josh Jacobs is trending out the last 2 weeks. We had him on our must-buy running backs list as a very stable running back too for the rest of the season. Post John Gruden, again, another player. The arrow is trending upwards. Over his last 2 games, averaging 3.5 receptions per game. He's catching 100% of his targets over that time span. That's something that's encouraging to see. His efficiency is rising from where we've seen it in years and weeks past. And throughout the majority of the early stages of the season, he averaged 5.8 yards per carry last week against who did the Raiders play last week? Las Vegas had the Giants. And then Devontae Booker on the other side of that contest was very productive as well. Josh Jacobs here against Kansas City. We've seen the Raiders, especially last year, really took the jump forward to playing very, very competitive games against this team. Beat the Chiefs once, very narrowly lost the second time around. And this year, with the Raiders currently leading the AFC West, with the Chiefs having their struggles, I don't care what you want to say about the Chiefs holding off the Packers last week. As a Packer fan, it was an atrocity watching Jordan Love, and I don't put all the blame on him. That's a totally different conversation. But their defensive coordinator knew that they could just blitz the living heck out of Jordan Love and that the Packers would be basically rendered useless offensively because he couldn't process the defense quickly enough and get the ball out of his hands. Besides the point, Kansas City's defense can still be absolutely sledgehammered in the run game. We saw A.J. Dillon put up some nice runs. Aaron Jones had really great runs last week. Josh Jacobs is no exception here. The Raiders are going to play ball control football, keep their offense on the field, and they are going to control this clock and keep their offense out there with Kansas City's defense on the field and limit the opportunities that Patrick Mahomes has. Now, we'll see how effective they are at doing that. As long as they don't turn the ball over, they should be able to, because the Raiders have been a very productive offensive football team this season. But I expect Josh Jacobs to come out here, see a healthy touch load, have very efficient rushing numbers on the ground. If he finds the end zone, see some of that receiving involvement that we've seen grow here over the past 2-3 weeks, I feel confident Josh Jacobs can be a very, very steady top 24 play this week and the rest of this fantasy season for that matter. And then Darrel Williams on the other side of this matchup. We saw Devontae Booker have a very impressive game on the ground last week. And this Chiefs team has had success running, and more so without Clyde Edwards-Helaire on the field. As weird as that is to say, the Chiefs have increased their rushing attempts with Clyde Edwards-Helaire off the field. I don't know why that's the case. I think Clyde is clearly the most talented player in this backfield. But Darrel Williams, and they've had somewhat of a committee-style system, but Darrel Williams has been the most consistently productive player in this backfield in Hilaire's absence. That he is the player I'm confident in this week against the Raiders' defense. Las Vegas' defense isn't as bad as it seems. With some other tougher matchups, I think that Darrel Williams has a safer floor and a little bit of a ceiling element that he can step up here and again reach those top 24 numbers we're looking for him here in this week. And the volume has been very good for Darrel Williams. I will point that out as well over the past few games without Clyde in the lineup. So he's got 22 touches, 77 yards from scrimmage against the Packers this past week. Catches 3 out of his 4 targets on that game. The week prior, 6 for 6, 61 yards through the air. Williams is adding upside in the passing game that some other running backs aren't giving us. And for a player who I think is very, very underrated in his skill set and what he can potentially provide to his team, I love Darrel Williams here in Week 10. I think that this Raiders matchup is something that, again, it's not an overly easy matchup, but it is exploitable enough that makes me confident that with the workload Darrel Williams has been seeing, with the Chiefs' struggles to pass the football consistently, efficiently, and keep the ball out of harm's way, I think that they realize they need to rely a little bit more on the run game than they have in years past, and that should open up the opportunity for Darrel Williams, who's also been the bigger, the bruising, the goal line back for this team. Hasn't found the end zone since his first start here with Kansas City, but that should be something that I think has an opportunity to change here in Week 10. So Darrel Williams, I like the matchup this week. I like the opportunity, the volume we've been seeing, and the usage. He's been more involved as a receiver than I would have expected him to this point. I think that continues here this week, and that makes him a top 24 option for lineups here in Week 10. Alrighty, those were our 5 must-start running backs here for Week 10 fantasy football action. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave it with a like and click that subscribe button. If you're new around here, we're trying to grow the SFS community, keep this thing growing, expanding, getting larger. We want to interact with each and every single one of you guys and make this the best tool out there and the best resource for you to get your weekly fantasy content, information, and lineup advice. Again, if you've got questions, drop those down in the comment section below, and myself or Eric will do our best to get back to as many of you as possible before kickoff for this week's game. So thank you all so much for watching. Go check out some of the other episodes we've posted here for Week 10 fantasy content. We've got 6 videos out through Monday and Tuesday already centered around Week 10 analysis and advice. So go take a look at those, and we'll see you there. Peace out.